I can't believe this woman will come here, despite all she did.
Woman, you can't go in there.
Obina, forgive me.
The scream tore through the drums like a blade through cloth. For one heartbeat, nobody moved. Then chaos broke loose at the palace gate. 2 guards lunged into the crowd and seized the woman by both arms, dragging her forward through the dust. She twisted against their grip, her wrapper ripping further with every pull.
Let me go. I only want to speak to him.
Silence! A guard barked. The drums stopped mid-beat. Dancers froze where they stood. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the struggle at once. It was Goma, the same Ugoma who once looked her husband in the eye and
Look
told
at
him
you,
he
sitting
would
there like
never
a fool.
become anything.
You are nothing
The
but a
same
weakling.
Ugoma who walked away from him and their only son the moment another man's wealth came calling. The same Ugoma who helped bury the one man who had loved her without conditions. She lifted her tear-streaked face toward the palace. Obinna, please, I know you can hear me. The royal doors swung open. A man stepped out wearing the crown. Not the broken man dragged away in chains months earlier. Not the poor prince they once laughed at behind cupped hands. The new king, Obinna. Ugoma stayed on her knees, her voice breaking.
Please, my lord, forgive me. I beg you, do not turn away. Have mercy.
I was blind, she said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. I thought you would never become anything. Obinna said nothing at first. He only looked at her the way a man looks at a storm that has already passed and can no longer touch him. Then the royal elder lifted his staff and announced to the whole kingdom.
Today, justice has returned to this throne.
Hooray! Justice!
The people began to whisper among themselves because they all remembered what happened only months earlier. They remembered how this same man was dragged away in chains while the whole village watched. They remembered how his own brother stole his crown right in front of him, smiling the entire time. They remembered how the kingdom almost collapsed into ruin because one family chose greed over blood. This is the story of how greed stole a throne and how destiny took it back. Let us go back to where it all began. Amudara was a peaceful kingdom. Tradition was respected here. Elders were honored, not just feared. The late king, Eze Okafo, ruled with a firm but fair hand, and he had 2 sons. And from the day they were born, the whole kingdom watched them grow into 2 very different men. The first son was Tukudi, a wealthy businessman who believed money could solve every problem life could throw at him. He built houses for the poor, but only when the cameras of the village storytellers were watching. He sponsored festivals every season. He gave fat envelopes to chiefs so they would speak well of him at gatherings. People respected his wealth, even as many quietly feared his temper behind closed doors. But behind that confident smile was a hunger nobody could fully see. He didn't just want comfort. He wanted the crown more than he wanted his own peace of mind. The second son was Obinna, a humble man who lived simply in a modest compound at the edge of the village. He helped farmers carry their harvest when their backs grew tired. He sat under the same tree as ordinary people and listened to their problems like they mattered. He believed a king should serve his people, not rule them like property to be managed. But because he had no wealth to show, many in the kingdom underestimated him. Some even called him behind his back, the prince with empty hands. Nobody in Omudara knew that the ancestors had already chosen a side, and nobody could have guessed how far some people would go once that choice became known. Before the old king's strength gave out completely, the elders journeyed to consult the spiritual custodians of the land as tradition demanded before any succession. What they brought back from that sacred grove shocked the entire palace to its foundation. The younger son carries the spirit of leadership, the custodian declared, her voice carrying no room for argument.
The ancestors have chosen Obinna.
The ancestors have chosen him to protect this kingdom in the seasons to come. The palace split in two that very night. Chukwudi could not believe what he was hearing. How can someone without wealth, without influence, lead this kingdom? He shouted before the gathered elders, his fists shaking with a fury he could barely contain. But there was someone standing quietly in the corner of that room, arms folded, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Chief Nwafo, the late king's own younger brother, the man everyone trusted to guard tradition. And he had already begun turning something dangerous over in his mind. Nobody noticed him slip out of the room before the meeting even ended. In public, Chief Nwafo pretended to support Obina completely, without hesitation. The voice of our ancestors must never be questioned, he told the people at every gathering, and they praised him loudly for his loyalty to tradition. They called him a righteous elder, a man who still feared the gods in an age when many had stopped. But at night, far from torchlight, in the shadows behind the palace walls, he met secretly with Chukwudi. A crown does not enter a man's head simply because spirits choose him, the uncle whispered, his eyes catching what little moonlight reached them. A crown enters a man's house because other men with power decide to carry it there.
A crown enters because men with power decide to carry it.
Chukwudi's eyes lit up like a man who had just found water in a dry season. And what exactly do you want in exchange for carrying it? My loyalty, Nwafo said simply, has always had a price. From that night, the quiet destruction of Obina had already begun, brick by brick, lie by lie. And the saddest part of it all is that Obina had no idea his own uncle, the man he greeted every morning with respect, was the one digging the pit beneath his feet. But the betrayal closing in on Obina didn't stop with his uncle. His own wife, Ugunma, had begun to feel a different kind of shame settle into her chest. Every time she walked past Chukwudi's compound on her way to the market, she saw his servants bowing low, his new cars gleaming in the sun, his buildings rising higher with every passing month. And every time she returned home, she walked into the same simple hut, the same modest evening meals, the same humble husband who had nothing to offer but a good heart and tired hands. She began comparing the two brothers in her mind, quietly, again and again, until something inside her slowly began to shift and rot. A woman cannot build a future with a man who has no future, she whispered to her own reflection one evening, watching the lamp flame flicker against the wall. She started visiting Chukwudi in secret, telling Obina she was going to see her sister. At first, Chukwudi only saw her visits as a clever way to humiliate his brother a little further, a small private victory. But pride is a strange thing. It grows roots in places you never expect. What started as revenge slowly turned into something else entirely, something neither of them was willing to name out loud. They started a secret affair. And neither of them cared by that point who they would have to destroy to get what they now wanted. With enough bribery passed quietly into the right hands and enough manipulation whispered into the right ears at the right gatherings, Chukwudi finally achieved the one thing he had always wanted. He became king. The same people who once mocked him in private now bowed before him in public, their backs bent low, their voices syrupy with sudden respect. And Obina, the humble prince the ancestors themselves had chosen, was pushed aside, humiliated in front of the very people he had once helped with his own two hands. Worse still, Ugoma stopped hiding her closeness to the new king entirely. She walked through the palace gardens beside Chukwudi as if her marriage to Obina had simply never existed. As if those years meant nothing now that a crown was involved. Through all of it, Chief Nwafo came to Obina often, offering false comfort with a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Stay patient, my son," he said, his voice warm and steady. "The truth always wins in the end. The ancestors do not forget." What Obina didn't know As he nodded and thanked his uncle for the kind words, was that the same hand comforting him was the very hand arranging his complete downfall. Everything came to a breaking point the day Obinna finally discovered the truth about his wife and his brother with his own eyes. He had been hearing the rumor round the village, but he did not believe or pay attention to it, not until the day he caught them red-handed. He confronted Chukwudi directly in the palace courtyard, his voice shaking with a pain words could barely hold.
You took the crown. Now you want to take my wife and everything. I am the king. I take what is
Chukwudi
mine.
panicked behind his composed face. He feared that if Obinna spoke this loudly, this publicly, his stolen crown would be exposed for exactly what it was, a theft dressed up in royal cloth. So, Chief Nwafo, sensing the danger, offered one final poisonous suggestion in a private meeting that same night. A man who threatens the crown, he said quietly, must disappear from view. Before the sun rose again, the sacred treasure of the kingdom, an object passed down through generations, said to carry the very spirit of their ancestors, was secretly planted inside Obinna's house while he slept. By morning, soldiers dragged him out in chains, his wife watching from a distance with an expression no one could quite read. "Thief!" the crowd shouted, spitting at his feet as he passed. "Betrayer of the gods! No wonder the gods rejected you to rule over us." The same people he had once helped carry their harvest now turned their backs on him completely, as if years of kindness had never happened. He was thrown into a dark prison cell, and the heavy doors closed behind him like the lid of a tomb. Nobody in that cheering crowd knew they were about to suffer for what they had just allowed to happen. For a while, it truly seemed like Chukwudi had won everything he ever wanted. The crown, the throne, the woman, the kingdom's loud performative respect. But something began to shift in Umudara. Something nobody could explain with ordinary reasoning, no matter how many herbalists they consulted. The crops in the farmlands began to fail, season after season, the soil turning stubborn and dry. The people who once feasted at every festival now struggled to find enough food for their children. And then, the new king himself fell sick, a sickness no herbalist in the region could name, let alone cure, no matter what roots or rituals they tried. The palace, once filled with music and the sound of celebration, grew silent and cold, as if the walls themselves had started holding their breath. Then came the cruelest blow of all. Ugonma became pregnant, but as her time approached, something went terribly wrong inside her body. She could not deliver the child. Day after day, her cries echoed through the palace corridors, while Chukwudi's own sickness grew worse beside her, the two of them suffering in rooms not far apart. The kingdom built on betrayal was beginning to collapse from the inside, one cracked pillar at a time. Desperate and running out of options, the elder summoned the spiritual custodian once more. What she revealed in that tense gathering left the entire palace frozen in fear. "This palace is suffering because it was built on betrayal," she said, her voice steady and completely unshaken by the king's status. She turned to face the sick king directly, refusing to look away. "The man you locked away carries no guilt. Until you release him and confess your sins before this entire kingdom, you will know no peace. Not in this palace, not in your bloodline, not for as long as the lie stands." Chukwudi refused at first, even from his sick bed. Pride still had a grip on him, even as the sickness drained his body hour by hour. But when his Ugomma screams grew louder through the palace walls, his own strength grew weaker with each passing night, and one of his sons died. Something inside him finally cracked open. He called the entire kingdom together, every chief, every elder, every farmer and trader and market woman, and stood before them, too weak now to hide behind anything. "I betrayed my own brother," he confessed, his voice cracking under the weight of every eye on him. "I stole his destiny. I accused an innocent man of a crime that I myself committed. Everything I built, this throne, this palace, this crown on my head, was built on another man's pain, and I knew it the entire time. A heavy silence fell over the crowd, broken only by a few gasps near the front. Obinna was released from prison that very hour, walking out into the sunlight as a free man for the first time in months, blinking against the brightness like someone returning from the dead. And almost immediately, the kingdom began to heal. Ugonma finally gave birth, weak but alive. The sickness in the palace lifted within days. It was as if the land itself had simply been waiting patiently for the truth to be spoken aloud. Justice came to Umudara, but not in the way many in the crowd had expected or even hoped for. Chukwudi was not killed for what he did. His punishment was something heavier to carry. He had to live out the rest of his life bearing the shame of his own choices. Stripped of the throne he had fought so hard and so dishonestly to steal. He was asked to stand by the king's gate daily. Chief Mafo, the uncle who sold his loyalty to the highest bidder, was banished from Umadara forever. Forbidden to ever set foot on his soil again, his name removed from the family compound records. And Ugoma, the woman who once called her own husband a man with no future, was stripped of her title as queen before the same crowd that once cheered her wedding. She and her newborn child were sent away from the only home she had known, with nothing but the clothes on her back. Chukwudi's first wife could not stand the shame her husband had brought on them and left the village with her remaining one son. Which brings us back to where this story began. The coronation. The wedding. Obinna married a new wife. The crowd watching as Obinna, the man once mocked for having empty hands, finally received the crown the ancestors always knew belonged to him long before he did. Outside the palace gates, Ugonma watched everything she had once thrown away with both hands. She watched the man she abandoned now standing as the most respected person in the entire kingdom. She watched the same people who once laughed at him behind cupped hands, now bowing low before him without hesitation. And beside him stood a new queen, chosen not for wealth or status, but for the quiet strength of her character. Her regrets sat heavy in her chest, unbearable in a way she had never felt before. But Obinna did not insult her. He did not raise his voice or call the guards. He simply looked at her one final time, the dust still on her torn wrapper, and said the only words she truly needed to hear. The greatest mistake a person can make is judging someone's future by their present condition. Then he turned. He walked back into the palace, his new queen beside him, and the gates closed behind him, slow and final. A new chapter for Omudara had finally begun. Thanks for listening and watching. Let's know your thoughts about this story in the comments section. Subscribe, like, and share. See you in the next video.